We are very happy that you have taken time to join us for our second Gender Cafe as a Society for Gender Professionals. This particular Gender Cafe is in partnership with CCINDLE, and it focuses on the understanding and countering of anti-gender movements in the world. Today, our moderator is Gagana. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. Gagana is a member of the Society for Gender Professionals Secretariat. She has a PhD in politics, human rights, and sustainability, cum laude from the St. Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa, Italy. She holds a myriad of other qualifications. She has recently completed a 2-year postdoctoral project hosted by the University of Venice, focusing on the attacks against Istanbul digital dimensions of gender-based violence and gender-based disinformation. Her areas of interests are human rights, gender rights, eradicating inequalities, and countering violence and disinformation. Thank you, Gagana, for moderating our session this afternoon, and it is now over to you.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you everyone for being here for the second Gender Cafe, which the Society of Gender Professionals is co-organizing with the Kindle project. Before we move to the panelists and to the very exciting presentations ahead, very quickly some information about SGP and the Kindle project. SGP's mission is to foster the production of and dissemination of applied gender knowledge. It also seeks to provide a platform for exchange of gender information and resources. It seeks to advance gender justice in member communities through coordinated feminist action and promote the development of intersectional gender expertise for professional practice. SGP also strives to strengthen connections between gender theory, policy, and practice. We support member collaboration, network building, co-mentorship, and feminist collaborative leadership. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see some summarized information, a relatively recent one about our membership, about our followership on social media. As you can see, SGP already has more than 50,000 members, subscribers, and followers across all continents. Later on, we will see some information also about the countries our members come from, and we have almost 3,000 subscribers to our newsletter. And yes, as promised, here you can see the countries that we currently cover. So more than 80 countries around the world and in all continents. Can we move to the next slide? A little bit about the gender cafes. This concept that is being developed and implemented regularly by SGP. I think the organization has already organized more than 15-20 cafes through the years. So the gender cafes have been intended as virtual conversation series connecting gender practitioners, academics, activists with the aim to explore pressing issues. The cafes are based on the idea of non-hierarchical sharing, questioning, and learning beyond the classroom. They are also directed towards professional development opportunities for members who are interested in raising profile of gender expertise. And a little bit, some information also about the Kindle project, although I'm sure our first panelists will elaborate on this part as well. So Kindle is an EU-funded research project that works directly with feminist grassroots activists, institutional actors, gender professionals, with the purpose of co-creating theoretical and practical knowledge on, firstly, anti-gender campaigns and how they challenge democracy, particularly through pathways to violence and politics of knowledge. Also on futures of society envisioned in feminist theories and practices related to democracy in Europe with respect to intersectional justice, inclusion, and participation. and also generate additional knowledge on feminist movements and feminist institutional responses to anti-gender and other anti-democratic forces. Next slide, please. Our agenda for today, I'm anxious to pass the floor to the panelists, but a little bit about the agenda. So we will shortly discuss the specific goals of this gender cafe, of today's gender cafe, which, as I mentioned, is the second one of the series we will be organizing with the Kindle project. Then we will have three presentations by four panelists, and then following the panel, we will move to discussions in small groups, in breakout rooms, which importantly will not be recorded. So each one of you will be invited and encouraged to share and discuss freely. And then after the breakout rooms, we will reconvene for a final discussion and closing remarks. The goals for today's discussion: firstly, discuss current trends involving gender-based violence targeted at public-facing women and sexual minorities and its impacts. Then identify potential policy actions. And the third goal will be discuss how greater accountability and commitment can be prompted among different actors, meaning political parties, traditional and new media, social media platforms, and tech companies. The questions for our panelists, these are just some questions that we decided to formulate in advance in order to have a more directed and targeted discussion. The speakers have been asked to share their thoughts and insights about, firstly, what are the current trends involving violence against women and LGBTIQ+ persons in visible positions in their particular domains. Secondly, what are the impacts of these trends on human rights and democracy? And the third question is, how can greater accountability and commitment be promoted among different actors? So we can start with the panel. I'm really excited to welcome Professor Connie Rocheband and Professor Andrea Christian. They will be talking today about gender-based violence and democratic backsliding. I'm really looking forward to it, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh.
Actually, I will start by presenting you. So Professor Rocheband is an associate professor at the Political Science Department of the University of Amsterdam. She has written extensively on the politicization of gender-based violence, gender mainstreaming, and equality policies, social movements, and transnational feminist networking based on research conducted in the Netherlands, Spain, and Latin America. Her current work focuses on the implications of democratic backsliding for gender equality policies in Central and Eastern Europe and Latin America. In the Kindle project, funded by the Horizon Europe program, she works with a group of European feminist scholars towards strengthening and reinvigorating European democracies, starting from the assumption that feminist theories and activism are essential sources of both resistance to anti-gender discourse and politics. Can we move to the next slide, please? Professor Andrea Christian is a lead researcher for the Inequalities and Democracy Working Group and Senior Research Fellow at the Democracy Institute Central European University and professor at the Department of Public Policy and the Gender Studies Department of Central European University, Vienna. Her current research analyzes the politics of gender and other inequalities in times of democratic erosion and autocratization, and looks at forms of civil resistance to equality policy backsliding in such contexts. Her most recent work with Connie Rocheband is on the opposition to the Istanbul Convention and its consequences in 4 Central European member states. Her other publications look at how processes of autocratization impact the reconfiguration of civic space, patterns of gender-based violence, and critical independent knowledge production. And this time, for real, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gergana, for the generous introduction and for explaining the gender cafes to all of us. Very excited to be here, and thank you for giving us the opportunity. So we are both talking. We're gonna alternate with Connie, and I will start. So what we want to present is the take the Kindle project has on understanding gender violence as part of anti-gender politics and as a consequence of anti-gender politics, and how we look at this. One thing that you have not mentioned about the Kindle project, and maybe it's important for the audience to understand, is that we are comparing several countries in the European Union, some of which are consolidated democracies like Spain, Sweden or Belgium, but we also include in our sample countries like Hungary, which is the only electoral autocracy in the European Union, and Poland, which only recently got out of its autocratic regime, and Italy, which is, again, we could call an autocratizing country. So we have a mix of regimes, a mix of countries, and it is this context in which we are trying to make sense of how anti-gender politics is connected to violence and gender-based violence. So our entry point is basically that these anti-gender, illiberal anti-gender, the anti-gender project, which we see now globally, but we certainly see in several countries of Europe, is a project which is inherently misogynist, it's racist, it's homo and transphobic, so it has a very clear exclusionary agenda, and where attacks on gender are really central to them. It has an exclusionary vision of the nation, one in which the demos is seen as hierarchical, as anti-pluralistic, and it has a democracy notion which is majoritarian and anti-pluralistic, and it's clearly the elements of this illiberal regime or illiberal project, next to being or through its elements of being exclusionary, they are also clearly autocratizing, and even if they may take place in regimes which are democratic, they still have consequences for the quality of democracy in those contexts. So what we think is that given these the nature of these anti-gender projects, they very much contribute to the legitimation of gender-based violence, and it is this that we want to understand. We see this contribution both in terms of using violence to pursue the objectives of the project, to setting up, to gaining power for the project, but also especially in cases where the project is already in power and is part of the state ideology, to maintain such regimes and to push down opposition to such regimes and maintain the hierarchy as it's working. So what's really interesting here is that gender-based violence, including political violence, is really a feature of all political regimes. So one could say, what has changed? It's always been like that. So is there anything that is changing in this context? We would like to say yes, that the anti-gender politics is, and it's strengthening, it is contributing to more gender violence, and it is this difference that we want to try to put our finger on. So in the project, we have two aims. On the one hand, we by now there is quite some evidence that violence is increasing in political arenas and also against civil society representing gender equality objectives or different feminist groups. And so there is against media, which is representing gender equality, or just women journalists. So we have some evidence about violence already. What we want to make sense of is not so much just how much more violence is, but what are the mechanisms, what are the pathways that are what are the pathways through which the project, the anti-gender politics, is contributing to violence. So a little bit of the logic of what is happening here. And on the other hand, we're also interested to understand the link between this violence and democracy. So how this violence, so we see the anti-gender politics emerging in some of the most consolidated democracies, even in Europe. So we don't find it very useful to just focus on the countries that are autocratizing and where anti-gender politics is part of the regime, but we want to understand also how this operates in other contexts. And so what are the de-democratizing effects of such violence? So that's our entry point. Can I ask for a change of slides, please? Yeah, okay, thank you. So we propose a conceptual framework to do this analysis. We want to look at violent practices on the one hand, so to understand how anti-gender politics leads to more violent practices and what are maybe differences in these kinds of violent practices, and whether actually there is some increase in violence or not. And we're looking at this in our countries in the Kindle project. But we also argue that it is not sufficient to look at the violent practices, because that's not the only way how anti-gender politics impacts gender-based violence. But we're saying that there is also, it has a very important impact on what we call violence regimes, basically. So we argue that anti-gender politics facilitates conditions that are conducive to more violence and conducive to a legitimation of violence, which may not be specifically practices of violence, but it just leads to a context in which there can be more violence, and that is acceptable. So this is how much I wanted to say now. And Connie, I'm passing on to you. Can we ask for a next slide, please?
Yeah, thank you. So we are trying to explore, we are exploring and trying to understand and theorize what kind of violent practices do we see across these countries that we can link to increased anti-gender movements. And so we use a definition of violence, which is based on an existing definition of Marie Breen Smith. And so we define violence as the use of emotional, social, or economic force, coercion or pressure, as well as physical and sexual harm, either taking place in public or in the private sphere, with the aim of establishing or keeping gendered power hierarchies, gender, sexual, and racialized orders, seizing and controlling economic, political, and other resources, asserting the supremacy of one form of national identity over another or others. This is the way we understand violence. So we have quite a broad understanding, and it's very much linked to this key political project. And so gender is in multiple ways in it, but gender is also can also be there in the intent of the attack, like how it's intended, how it is serving to maintain or reproduce or strengthen gender binaries, hierarchies, but also racial and sexualized hierarchies, but also whether in its form or in its consequence it is gendered. So as the definition already states, it can happen in multiple spaces. So often this kind of violence is seen as political violence, and so happening in the political sphere. And indeed, it can happen in the political sphere, but it can also happen in what is often considered the private sphere. And it's quite interesting to see, indeed, that there's a lot of what we know from other research, that there's a lot of continuity and interrelatedness of different forms of violence. So, for instance, intimate partner or domestic violence is one of the core predictors of radicalization or people becoming politically violent. So that's quite interesting, and vice versa. So there is already an established link between that. So it happens in multiple spaces. And of course, very important, it also happens online in the cyberspace. And we will hear more in the other presentations about that, because that's a very important space where a lot is happening. It also means that it's political in the sense that all kinds of different spaces can become politicized, as we are seeing across the world, right? It's very visible in education. I think the United States is a prime example, but we're also seeing that in Europe, in reading circles, in academic workshops, libraries, exhibition places. So many places become politicized and become also places where people become exposed to violence. Moving to the next slide, please. Yeah, so we are interested in trying to understand, like, who is harmed. That may be very different as people. So it can happen at the level of individuals, like in politicians or journalists, but also civilians, but also organizations. So in our research, we find a lot of evidence that civil society organizations are attacked, but also academia, think tanks, and so on. So organizations may be harmed, and particular groups in societies. And we know, of course, that there's a lot of violence going on against trans people in particular, but also racialized groups who are particularly targeted by these anti-gender forces, as they call it. There may be multiple perpetrators, and we are particularly interested in understanding the role of the state, although not only the state, but we are definitely interested in seeing, like, if there is a state where the regime is captured by anti-gender forces, so it's autocratizing. Do we see different kind of violence practices, violence policies? Do we see the police or the judiciary or other state and law enforcers operating in a different way? What's the role of, for instance, state-sponsored media or propaganda machinery in this? So how is the state complicit in either perpetrating violence, but it may also be in condoning violence? And for us, it's really important to see and find out whether there's key difference between more autocratizing regimes where anti-gender actors are in power, or regimes that are still considered sort of consolidated democracies. Perpetrators may also be civil society, because we often tend to think of civil society as progressive, but of course there's a lot of very conservative and anti-gender civil society actors that play a key role in perpetrating violence, and also there's a lot of illegal paramilitary organizations as well, like extreme rights, neo-Nazi groups, and so on, that play a very active role in perpetrating violence. Organized religion, we see in many countries, is in some way implicated, often maybe more through all kinds of discursive violence, but yeah, we need to learn more about that. In our project, we also find that healthcare, there's a lot of violence happening in healthcare. So, for instance, thinking of blocking access to reproductive rights or to sexual rights, to blocking the access of healthcare to trans people, and so on. So this is also core institutions that we found in our research to be quite important. Media plays a quite important role in perpetrating violence and circulating and formulating all kinds of hate speech. And all kinds of everyday members, we call them, of the political community. So happening in cyberspace, but also street violence, and all these, what we call these newly politicized spaces where a lot of struggles are going on of anti-gender actors against feminist, queer, and LGBTQIA communities. Yes, please, to the next slide. I think we're missing one. Sorry. Is it okay? Is it right down there? Are we missing a
Yeah,
slide?
we are missing one, but it's okay. We can make that link, right? It's
Yeah.
just linking. Yeah. And should I take over, or you want to do it?
No, we can go on to the next one, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the missing slide was basically about how we want to bring together the what, where, whom, and against whom aspects of practices, and to meet that or cross that and understand together with violence regimes. And I tell you, I know we are almost at the end of our time, but we still have 1 minute to cover violence regimes. So the other aspect next to practices, and Connie has very well presented the various aspects of violence practices where we are working on disentangling what is going on and what may be specific and new in the current context. The other aspect where we want to work and where we are looking at the countries that we compare is violence regimes. And what we want to say is that anti-gender politics is impacting conditions which political and social conditions which may facilitate more violence through this. And we detect particularly 3 aspects where this is really important. It is first, and this is kind of a background condition which applies for some countries, but not so much for others. It's erosion of democratic institutions. And here what we mean is particularly losing independence of judiciary, decaying social services, unaccountable law enforcement. These are general democratic conditions which in autocratic regimes are decaying, and as such are making the state unable to respond basically properly to cases of violence, and as such condoning in a way violence. But next to this, and we clearly see how this is a case for Hungary or for Poland or maybe coming up in Italy, but it's not so much the case in Sweden, for instance, or in Belgium, where these institutions operate quite well. Now, the second condition where we see that anti-gender politics clearly has an impact is the responsiveness of policies on gender-based violence. So, to what extent these policies are sending the message that they can defend victims? Are they able to efficiently respond to address complaints, to protect the victims, and so on? And what we see is that anti-gender politics has enormous impact on this. So just to mention the most evident example is blocking ratification of the Istanbul Convention in several countries, which is the most progressive international norm currently on gender-based violence. But you also see changing legislation, reframing legislation, moving towards more criminalization and away from protection, moving away from individual victim-based approach or a gender equality approach towards an approach which is more protecting families and protecting the community and so on. So reframing in ways that are contrary to gender equality. But we also see the impact, which is not so upfront, not so visible, is impact on implementation of these policies. So cutting services, taking away service provision from feminist organizations and women's rights organizations, and all of a sudden funding family protection and various religious organizations to provide the same services, undoing or disregarding protocols that were developed by women's rights activists. So making in general the implementation of violence policies inefficient and not sensitive to gender equality. And also, and most importantly, by vilifying and persecuting in some places, but often just like really vilifying and making stigmatizing feminist organizations, pushing them out from policy processes so that they cannot anymore be involved in these violence policy processes. So overall, if you look at these tendencies separately, you see a decreasing responsiveness of violence policies and gender-based policies addressing gender-based violence. And finally, and this is again a factor that is very visibly coming with anti-gender politics. It is an increasing support for misogyny, racism, homo, and transphobia within the society. And there's two ways in which this is manifested. One is political discourses, so having very high-level politicians basically approving of cases of violence or disapproving of the Istanbul Convention or other pieces of gender equality or violence legislation. So basically legitimizing at the highest political levels through the discourse, anti-gender discourse, the existence of gender violence, but also erosion of public support for so when the context is so hostile, when the media, the political discourse is continuously pushing on the misogynist and anti-gender discourses, then public attitudes will inevitably change, and violence would be more acceptable, and impunity would be the basic standard rather than the responsibilization. So overall, we believe it's important to not only look at anti-gender politics as impacting, bringing more violence directly, that is actually perpetuating violence, but also looking at this violence regime as being favorable to more violence happening in the society. So that's what we wanted to say. We are a little bit over. Sorry, Gargana, you were a very good, very generous chair. Sorry for.
No, it's
I
thank you so much. I appreciate you being mindful of the time, and thank you for this presentation, for presenting the Kindle project in greater detail, and highlighting this importance of studying also democratic backsliding, autocratization, and really also introducing and discussing this multitude of actors who might actually perpetuate violence, because I agree that we don't think about some of them that often. So thank you again, and I would like us to move to our second presentation today. I hope we have Cecilia online, because I think maybe they were experiencing some technical difficulties. So our next speaker is Cecilia Mwende Maunda. And the topic of the presentation would be countering anti-gender movement online, gender-based violence against women and LGBTIQA+ persons. And could we move to the next slide so I can briefly present Cecilia? Cecilia is a broadcast journalist based in Kenya. She's also a specialist in gender. Sorry. Just a second. I'm hearing some background noise. She's also a specialist in gender digital security training, with experience training women, journalists, and human rights defenders. She's the current elected Secretary General of the International Association of Women in Radio and Television Kenyan chapter. Cecilia is on the quest to make sure that even the most vulnerable feel safe online. Cecilia is also a user experience expert and leads training on collecting feedback and evaluating how effective online security looks like. Cecilia is focused on creating a holistic approach to digital security. She is a graduate of the University of Nairobi, where she completed a Master of Arts in Communication from the University of Nairobi, and is currently pursuing her Doctor of Philosophy in Communication Studies at Moi University in Kenya. Her thesis is concentrated on digital security in this era of data mining. Cecilia, the floor passes to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cecilia Maundu. I'm a broadcast journalist. I'm a digital security trainer, and I work at the intersection of technology, human rights, and journalism, with a focus on countering online abuse against women journalists, women politicians, and the LGBTIQA plus community. I work and live in Nairobi. I have a podcast. It's called Digital Data Podcast, where I talk about on issues dealing with online violence, digital rights, and the issue of online safety. So allow me to share my screen. So today I will look at the issue of trends involving violence against women and LGBTQIA plus people in the media. I will also talk about the impacts of these trends on human rights and democracy. And we will look at strategies and tactics that are being used by organizations, strategies and tactics that are being used by organizations, activities, and ordinary citizens to fight back. So welcome. So when it comes to the issue of violence against women and individuals from LGBTQIA plus people who are visible in the media, especially most of who hold prominent positions in media, it remains a significant concern, and it manifests through various forms of abuse and discrimination. So what are some of the trends? One of the trends that is very, very common, and I'm sure most of you have seen it, and it's very rife on social media. Social media is a very fertile ground for online harassment and abuse, especially for women who are in the media, that is journalists, and also the LGBTIQA plus media figures. And social media platforms are very fertile with this of this issue. This is because of so many issues. One of them is caused by anonymity, and also the issue of big tech not being able to take responsibility of what is happening on their platform. We can say they're trying, however, there's still much that is left to be done. There's also the issue of misogynistic and homophobic rhetoric, which I'm sure most of you have seen. It is very, very common. It's a trend, and it is a trend that is worrying because it has been like this for many years, and we unfortunately are not seeing a reduction to it. And then there's the issue of social media attacks. As I mentioned a bit earlier, social media is a fertile ground for these attacks. And then there's the issue of cyber stalking. There's the issue of doxing. Doxing is from the word document. So this is putting confidential, correct information of an individual online without their knowledge. So for example, I'm called Cecilia Maundu. I'm a journalist. I work for this organization. This is my number. This is where I live. This is where my partner live. This is where my children go to school. That is doxing. And it is intended for ill purposes because they're trying to put that information so that people can be able to get hold of your information and people start harassing you. And also some of the people start, following you. And one thing about cyber harassment, online violence, cyber stalking, it is sometimes does actually move offline, and it's a very dangerous trend because we've seen people who've been attacked online, then they're trolled, and then the conversation moves offline, and then unfortunately some of them it has turned tragic. So what are some of these impacts that trends on human rights and democracy? So there's something we call erosion of freedom of expression, and this involves silencing their voice. Women and LGBTQIA individuals in the media are often targeted by harassment and violence, and this violence is aimed at intimidating them. The goal of these perpetrators is to silence these people, is to make them move offline and make them not feel safe on the online space. And most of the time, it creates what we call a chilling effect. And most of these marginalized communities, I would call them, they don't feel safe online. So there's also the issue of self-censorship. They self-censor not because they want to, but fear of backlash, because you are afraid that people might come for you. And also, it is also a way of making sure that they curtail on your freedom of expression. And also, it has a chilling effect on journalism. When journalists self-censor themselves, then the society miss out on very important information that affects them. So it does not only affect the journalists, but it also affects the issue of how they're doing their work. And then there's threat to democratic participation. This is very, very, how do you say? This is very, very visible. Media plays a very key role in shaping public opinion. Media plays a very key role in informing the community, informing the society on what is happening. So one of the things that really, really happens is people don't get the correct information. And also this has brought in the issue of misinformation and disinformation. Silencing of marginalized voices diminishes the issue of having more ideas, and also narrows the scope of the political debate. Also, there is the normalization of discrimination, unfortunately, because it's the same thing we say online violence has been normalized. You know, we see it every day. People don't talk about it. There's a lot of bystandership. We see it and people don't talk about it. So it's like we are literally okaying this habit, you know? And also it brings in the issue of barriers of representation. So there's also the weakening of human rights protection, violation of basic rights. Freedom of expression is a basic right. It is enshrined in most constitutions around the world. So you find if people cannot be able to express themselves, that is a basic right that has been violated. And also there is the issue of marginalization of vulnerable groups, the groups that we're actually talking about, because these are the most vulnerable group online. And also there's the erosion of trust. Victims and their communities lose trust in institutions like media, they lose trust with institutions like government, and also it is perceived as justice has not been served. So these are some of the trends, these are some of the impacts of these trends on human rights and democracy. So what are some of the strategies and tactics that are being used by organizations, activities, and ordinary citizens to fight back? So some of the strategies and tactics are global treaties and frameworks that have been created to be able to lobby for legislation, advocating for laws that criminalize the issue of online harassment, hate speech, and also pushing for stronger penalties and law enforcement for the perpetrators of this kind of violence, also promoting international frameworks, utilizing international agreements like the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Defenders to hold governments accountable. And then there's also the issue of gender-responsive policies which have been created, encouraging organizations and governments to adopt policies and that protect women and the LGBTQIA plus individuals in workspaces and public spaces. But also we need to ask ourselves a very uncomfortable question. Why don't policies work? One of the things that we have seen even in the institutions that I've worked for, there are policies, yes, but some of them are there just to tick a box. You find there's a policy, the people who work in the organization don't know the policies, they don't understand the policies. So they're not, even when they go through something, they have no idea that there's a policy that can be able to protect them for that. So what do we do in such cases? It is important that we educate the people that work in our organization about the policies that are in place to protect them on different issues. And then there's the issue of digital security training and tools. We need to have more trainings on how people can stay safe online. We need to have more trainings on how people can take control of their information online and the tools that are available to protect them. For example, when we talk about tools, we are talking about Signal. Signal is a secure messaging app. So if you want to communicate private information or sensitive information, it is always advocated use Signal, or there's another one called Wire. And with both tools, you don't need to register with your phone number. You can use even a pseudo email because you also don't want your information to be out there. And then there's the issue of capacity building in organization. Before I talk about capacity building, I also let me talk about the issue of organization, creating training programs for their communities, for their members on the issue of digital safety, and also encouraging the issue of using what we call private safe tools, rather, let me use that word. And then there's the issue of capacity building, as I mentioned. And then there's public awareness and public campaigns and awareness using like hashtags to be able, for example, stop online violence, say no to hate speech, and then also education initiative, media campaign. Media is a very, very powerful tool. Regardless of what they're saying, that mainstream media is on its deathbed. I disagree with that, because you find a lot of people still depend on on mainstream media to be able to actually confirm what has been on the online space, and also creating social media movements. I mean, for example, #MeToo. It was a very powerful campaign, a very powerful movement. So such things are quite some of the strategies that are being used, and they have seemed to be working. And then also when it comes to the issue of campaigns, we have like storytelling and testimonial. One of the reasons why I started my podcast is because I realize a lot of people are yet to agree that online violence is real violence. So I decided, why not bring in the victims for them to tell in their stories? Victims who are ready to come out with their stories, to tell and talk about it, so people can know just because it takes place on the online space does not make it less real. It does not make it like the other person on the other side is not a human being. They are a human being with feelings, with families, with friends, with partners, and all that stuff. So such things. And then there's the issue of having legal and policy advocacy. Unfortunately, when it comes to the issue of legal, especially when it touches on things of cyber harassment, most laws around the world are yet to catch up with technology. So, and also they are a bit vague. Let me give an example with the Kenyan law. We have something called Computer Misuse Act, and Section 27 of that act talks about cyber harassment. But unfortunately, the law doesn't define what is cyber harassment. It doesn't contextualize the crime. And if anything, it is edging onto the issue of freedom of expression. So those are some of the things that we need for them to be worked on. And when we talk about policy advocacy, we also need our policy makers to understand this issue, so that when they are making the policy, they know what they're talking about. And it is up also to the media to be able to educate the public on this issue. So also that falls under lobbying for stronger laws, also building support networks. I would want to say that there are a lot of networks that are coming up. Some of them have been in existence. Like I know an organization like Association for Progressive Communication has really been lobbying on the issue for on online safety for the LGBTQIA plus community, for people in the media. So that is important, building support networks, and not only building support networks, having funders who can support these networks. And then there is the issue of media advocacy. As I said, I mean, media is a very powerful tool. Why can't we take advantage of that tool? Be able to educate the public, bring this issue to light, and then also have policymakers know what we are talking about. So as I said earlier, so that they can be able to create policies that are able to work for the people. So that is my presentation. I would want to thank everyone. Thank you so much for listening. And also, if anyone would like more information on all this, there is my email address. You can be able to get me on email, send me an email, and let me know your query or whatever it is that you're asking. So thank you so much, and to the next speaker.
So our third panelist today is Brinda Lakshmi. They, them pronounce. So Brinda today is talking about countering anti-gender movement, online gender-based violence against women and LGBTIQ plus persons. Can we go to the next slide, please? Brinda is a queer feminist research and advocacy professional working at the intersection of gender, sexuality, human rights, and technology. Their advocacy efforts are informed by their work as a LGBTQI plus activist and peer supporter. Brinda has extensive experience in advocacy, training, and community work, primarily in South Asia, and conducted capacity building for marginalized communities, including the LGBTI plus community. They authored the research study, Gendering of Development Data in India, Post-Trans Act 2019 in 2023, as part of the Our Voices, Our Future project, supported by Association for Progressive Communications, as well as the study, Gendering of Development Data in India, Beyond the Binary in 2020 for the Center for Internet and Society India, as part of the Big Data for Development network supported by IDRS Canada. So I've also had the chance to work with Brinda here at the SGP. So it's really nice to have you. The floor is yours. Again, I'll be very thankful if you stick to 10, 11 minutes. Thank you, Brinda.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So quickly, I want to give a quick overview of what I'm going to be covering in my presentation. It's going to be building a little bit on what Cecilia shared with respect to the kinds of gender-based violence that people experience online, women and LGBTIQA plus persons face online, as much as we could hear from Cecilia's presentation. That is, I'm going to specifically focus on the Global South and technology used and the related manipulations. Right? And also give you a brief introduction to machine learning and how that works or doesn't work to detect online gender-based violence, right? My work is, my presentation today is based on two pieces of work that I have been a part of. One is a web-based plugin that was built to filter online gender-based violence, and the other is my research study. Next slide, please. So when I'm talking about Global South perspectives and gender-based violence here, it is very important to acknowledge the diversity in the identities and languages, right? And this will be the case even in the Global North, but more so in the Global South. Why? Because platforms, technologies are built for English speakers by English speakers, and which is the product, which is then a product from the Global North. Okay, and while we understand, while we look at online gender-based violence, it is very important to also look at the categories of users and their usage. So we've been looking at so far in all the presentations, we've been looking at public figures. What do I mean by that? People in positions of power, politicians, women politicians, journalists. These are the kinds of people we have been looking at. Here I'm going to slightly expand on the understanding of public figures when we look at people, especially within some of the Global South contexts, right? In terms of when we look at influencers. So influencers might not be public figures or very well known in their private lives or as in the offline world. They might just be people online who are very well known and have followers and speak on specific issues. So I'm going to expand the understanding of public figures, going beyond journalists, activists, politicians, to also include influencers. So basically, all these different people are targeted on the specific issues that they work on or that they talk about. And there's curbing of their freedom of expression, basically, because these are people with, why do I include influencers also? Because they have a large number of followers. So the issues that they speak about become amplified. So that's why they get targeted. as opposed to public figures, there are also ordinary users who exist within bubbles. And as long as you stick to your usual cat memes, dog memes, and food pics and posts about it, you exist within your bubble without facing mostly online gender-based violence. Of course, there are still instances of bots and individuals that target all accounts with spams, right? Hello, I can hear someone in the background. I think someone needs to mute. Bots and individuals targeting all accounts, and some of them specifically target LGBTQIA plus persons for extortion, right? Like try to, and this is independent of how large their account is. So this also needs to be taken into consideration when we're talking about online gender-based violence. Next slide, please. Yeah, so when we're talking about targeted online, when we're talking about the global south, what is also very important is the use of the use of native languages by non-English speakers, like to for their online abuse and harassment, for targeted online abuse and harassment of public figures and other users also, right? So one main thing is, so let's take the case of words like transgender, or hijra is an indigenous transgender identity in India. So these two words, for instance, if you take the example of just hijra and transgender, these two words are legitimate words to describe a specific identity, right? But by the way these words are used in posts, in conversations, in comments, etc., it in the place of slurs, right? They teach the system, they teach machines to understand these words as slurs instead of, or shape the meaning of these words, not even as slurs, because unless we flag and tell the system that they are using in this context this word as a slur, the system automatically then understands transgender, hijra, and related words, right? And there are other words in specific languages other than English as well, which may be used in a similar manner. So the machine then learns that these words are, it's common to use these words in these contexts, and it normalizes it instead of flagging it. That is one pattern. Another pattern is non-detection of variations within different versions of the same language. For example, Tamil is a language that is spoken in India, in southern India, as well as in Sri Lanka, parts of Sri Lanka. But the versions of the Tamil are very different, and so the slurs used are also different, right? Like the OGBV using different and same words, they may have different meanings in both the different languages, and they exist in bubbles on different platforms and don't get picked up because the volume of users speaking this particular version of the language might not be large enough for the platform to find business value in investing and understanding the sort of challenges that these users face. And this is the case with users of most languages. At least Tamil, there is a large volume of users across the world. And this is the case with Tamil. It is more so even with languages that have higher number of users. Then there is the pattern of using emojis to remain undetected by system. What do I mean by that? The word flower in Tamil is called poo, right? So what they use in words that have the sound of poo, instead of poo, the syllable poo, they use the emoji of a flower. So there are a lot of slurs which have this sound. So they replace this sound with this particular emoji, and thus they don't get detected by these systems as a slur or flagged at all. So you will find volumes like tons and tons of conversations, data online, if you go digging in deep, with slurs that are sort of hidden, go undetected by systems by using these different emojis to target people. Next slide, please. So now it is very important to understand machine learning and artificial intelligence when we're talking about gender-based violence and how detecting it and addressing it, works online, right? Machine learning is a subfield of artificial intelligence that uses algorithm trained on data sets to create self-learning models that are capable of predicting outcomes and classifying based on past user behavior. What do we mean by this? This is what I was talking about. If large volumes of tweets or let's say posts use, let's say, the word transgender in an abusive manner, and that's what is used to train the system then learns a certain understanding of transgender and applies that understanding of transgender to respond to actions or to take actions. Similarly, hijra, similarly, so all these, and I'm giving examples in words that you understand in English. Imagine these words in other languages, and these machines are not built in these languages. They are being appropriated by users in those languages. So the detection becomes that much harder, right? But machine learning is used for other sort of behaviors also. Some of the examples are mentioned on the screen, like, for your commercial purposes, for product and content suggestions. So this product and content suggestions especially becomes very critical on online platforms and social media platforms. When you don't flag content, right, the machine does not understand. As much as we don't have accountability from platforms for reporting very often posts and things like that, it is still useful to report, because at least the machine will understand that the content that is being shown to you is irrelevant, even if not inappropriate. When it asks you if it and gives you the option of inappropriate, please click inappropriate, so that the machine learns in whatever level, at least about your preferences, and that sort of a content then doesn't get shown to you. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not going so much into the democratic implications of this, because we've heard quite a bit of this. I am looking at potential policy actions, because I have looked at the challenges faced or the challenges due to online gender-based violence from individuals' perspective, from these from the perspective of journalists, activists, and these communities, right? The policy action cannot be effective without addressing the inaccessibility and opaqueness on these platforms. For instance, I've actually heard an influencer who does not read English and only knows Tamil, and when she tries to flag a content and goes into the policy section, the policy being in English instead of being in Tamil. So till the step of reporting, it's in Tamil, and once they go into the policy section, the policy is only available in English. So then it becomes inaccessible to that many number of users, right? Also, your consent information. So many of us who also know English, we still struggle to actually give consent on platforms for the kind of data that is being shared. And to understand our privacy, we just go on and click OK, just click it, tick it, and click OK, because it's just volume and volumes of information that we cannot actually process very easily. So that makes the whole process opaque and inaccessible for everyone, right? And then there is the systemic issue of political nexus between political parties, media, social media platforms, and technology companies. In different countries, there have been enough number of patterns that have been studied and covered in the media as well by journalists and researchers, activists, etc. That most of these platforms, they side with the political party in power, because that is necessary for them to continue working in any particular country, and that needs to be taken into consideration when we are thinking about policy action to address these issues. Next slide, please. Okay, and there's also, when we look at the global south specifically, laws need to be taken into consideration, especially digital laws, privacy laws, criminalization and of homosexuality, gender expression, etc. Why? Because they're all interconnected. For people who don't have rights as let's say LGBTQIA plus community, they cannot then claim that my gender identity and sexual orientation is being targeted online, because they don't even have the right to self-identify themselves or say, I am of this sexual orientation and I'm being targeted. So then digital rights also are closely linked to other rights, and there is general erasure of their human rights on these platforms. And presently available options for reporting recourse on platforms are generally sidestep accountability from the side of the technology companies, which is to say, it will give you options as a user to either report, to block the user, flag the content, but you don't really know if anything happens to that account after you've done all of that, right? Nothing happens. We don't know if anything has happened on that front. It is only a matter of you can customize your experience on the platform and say, I would like to see this content. I don't want to see this content. I would like to block that user. That's the level of option available to you. So like I said, it's opaque and inadequate. Also, platforms, for the sake of saying that they actually take inputs from communities, etc., they hold
Brinda, can you hear us? I'm afraid.
Hello?
Hello? Brinda,
Yeah.
Are you there? Okay, you're back. Please go on.
I think my internet, I just dropped off. I don't know when, at which point did I drop? Here? Like, I spoke about inputs from consultations that you heard.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can go on from
here. Okay, so input from consultations, that's the bit. Next slide, please. There's need for accountability on that front to understand how it's introduced. Next is diversity within policy making and management is also necessary. Currently, gender continues to be understood in the binary even within international organizations like United Nations, which then means that the gender experience of transgender persons are completely erased within technology systems as well, right? And there's a diversity crisis within the AI sector also, gender and race. Women comprise only 50% of AI research staff in Facebook and 10% at Google. What that also means is, if these people are not part of the teams designing technology, then these experiences of these communities don't get represented. And AI studies then continue to remain within the binary and continue to have biases as well. Next slide, please. So quickly, this is one additional bit that I wanted to add for the sake of all the people here present today. This is something that I give people or hand out to people where I do digital security, when I do digital security trainings for organizations. First and foremost, very important thing, most important is your action against gender-based violence or anything, any digital violence you experience depends on your local laws, whether you have digital rights, privacy laws, and LGBTQ rights. Please be mindful of that before you do take any sort of serious action on it. That said, it is useful always for organizations to do risk assessment, to strategize for organizational protection, especially in countries where homosexuality is criminalized or the gender expression and diversity is not recognized. Train employees about digital security, first aid during induction, especially when you're working on human rights and gender-related issues before you begin a particular large-scale program. Also, if you face any sort of violence, either as an organization or as an individual, document evidence and do not delete anything before you document them. Like even if it is one-off, right? Let's say you work on a specific issue and you know you're going to repeatedly post content related to this particular issue. It's always useful to document it, because you might block this one user. Tomorrow, 5 other users, 5 other accounts might pop up. And by documenting this, you might be able to file a complaint and the police might be able to track the IP of this one same user who's creating all these accounts to target you. One person creating accounts to target you. So that can be mapped. So documenting evidence usually is helpful for this. Report the attack on the platform also, and where you have lost permit, please report, file a complaint as well. Again, keeping in mind the safety of the survivor. Also, why do I say report on the platform? When you go to file a legal case, usually the legal system would want to know if you have taken all the right steps before you're coming to the system of law to seek recourse. Have you reported to the platform? Have you collected evidence? So they will want to understand that you have behaved in good faith, taken action in good faith, and have been responsible, and then go towards the legal system. So this is very, very critical. Once you've done all this, change, or even after you've just saved evidence, right? Change the password on all your accounts, secure your devices, activate multi-factor authentication, and please inform a friend or family member, inform someone, because you don't know when online attacks are going to suddenly turn into physical in-person attacks, how your location can be found. It is, please be careful about how you are using your location information as well. Same way, consider changing your phone number if necessary, depending on the level of seriousness of it. That's about it. Thank you so much. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Brinda, for sharing also practical tips and practical advice on how we can behave and should behave online in order to be more protected, more safe, and again for highlighting all these risks that unfortunately are there for us, not only as individuals but as activists also, and as people who often feel vulnerable online. That was the last presentation for today, the last speaker on our panel. Thanks everybody again for their insightful presentations and contributions. I'm really sorry that Cecilia had troubles with the internet connection, but the SGP team, we will think of some way to bring Cecilia's expertise and experience. We will, of course, share her presentation, but we will also think of another way to make up for losing her in the midst of her presentation. So since we only have 15 minutes late, a little bit more than 15 minutes late left until the end of the cafe, we have decided not to go into breakout rooms, but just stay here for a general open discussion. I will just ask my colleague who is recording the session maybe to stop the recording for the discussion. We will take notes, but we will stop the recording so that you can share freely, as I said, without any worries about being recorded. And I invite yes, so these are some of the ways in which you can get involved in SGP work. You can register as an SGP member to access member-only networking, career development opportunities. We also have 2 semi-annual SGP members meetings, and one of them, the second one for 2024, is actually coming up on December 10th. So follow our social media channels for more information. You can also propose a gender cafe. Anyone can propose and co-organize a gender cafe with SGP. You can find the template for proposing a topic on our website. You will see the link in our presentation when you get the slides. And also you can always subscribe to the SGP monthly newsletter, which contains regular updates on our activities, on resources or job opportunities, forthcoming events, and so on. You can also see the gender cafe proposal form in the chat. Can we go to the next slide? And you can also subscribe to to the Kindle Project newsletter. You'll see the link. The Kindle Project also has a LinkedIn profile, so you can follow updates there as well. And here you can see our website, our email, a link to our LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram profiles. So let's keep in touch. And I think that's all. Do we have more slides? No. Thank you so much again to the wonderful panelists, to everybody who was here today, to everybody who shared their thoughts, insights, and expertise. And we really look forward to seeing you again in a future HB event. Thank you so much. Have a nice day or evening.